Hello and welcome to Tisky Sour. In theory, we're 3 days away from a no-deal Brexit, potentially, but I'm feeling fairly relaxed about it. Theresa May has gone begging today to Merkel and Macron to ask for a long extension to our membership of the EU. Well, in fact, she's asked for an extension just up to the 30th of June, but they're probably going to give 9 to 12 months. What are we going to do with those 9 to 12 months? I have no idea, but maybe my guests, Ash Sarkar, Senior Editor at Novara Media, and Lloyd Russell-Moyle, MP for Kemptown, have some ideas. Are you as relaxed as I am?
Yeah.
I kind of feel that is your one beer at the wheel. Like, you're like, guys, I'm feeling intensely relaxed about this whole no-deal Brexit
well, sometimes it's 2 beers and a coffee, and now I've had 1 beer and a black tea, and I just feel super zen. So we could just do mindfulness for the next hour if we really wanted to.
I'm a bit more freaked out about a no-deal, even though Parliament have said that they are not willing to countenance such a thing. I am a bit more worried about it.
Well, a no deal itself would be kind of a shit show. It would be like Armageddon kind of nightmare.
Are you not making yourself a little bit of a what's it to fortune?
Hostage.
A hostage to fortune by saying it will be like the apocalypse? Because I mean, a no deal Brexit will survive.
It's not going to happen.
We'll manage.
There'll be no test.
But even if it does happen, we'll just get a bit poorer for a few months, potentially 2 years. That's what the IMF said.
I mean, the reality is that what will happen is, and I am exaggerating a bit. You're right. You'll have a few weeks of
Remainers. They always exaggerate. It always comes and bites them in the ass afterwards.
Well, I like things biting in my ass, but kind of not usually politically terms.
I feel so sorry for the poor Guido intern who has to watch all of these and is like,
oh, they've had to watch a lot of my stuff as well. This is not the worst. There will be a few weeks of absolute chaos, and there will be a few weeks of absolute chaos if there was no deal. Most of it not life-threatening, but very concerning. Kind of some planes won't fly. Not most planes will, but some planes won't. For example, you won't be able to introduce any new routes until you get a new deal. Some people say in climate change terms that would be a positive thing. You will have problems with supplies of certain drugs for a period of time, but most of that would be over in a few weeks. And then the longer term effect will be a depression of the economy. And what you'll see is a huge shift, probably in about 2 years, of the productive base. And so people who are focused on the productive manufacturing base, that will have to shift. Now, Britain will innovate and it will find other ways around these things, but the old productive base in terms of car manufacturing, etc., will end up shifting out of Britain in a large part. And we've already seen that in some of the plants that are talking about car manufacturing. Car manufacturing takes a 6-year lead time. So you would be talking about seeing the effects actually in 6 years' time, not now. So it's a long time we're talking about. But just because you lose a plant doesn't mean that people are going to be jobless and homeless, because people are creative people and they'll find other things. But it's not going to be good for a few weeks at least. And I know that sounds a bit flippant, but for people whose life depends on it or individual circumstances depend on it, it will be difficult.
I mean, I sort of think that the transformation to the productive base is the bigger story, and it's something which hasn't been explored about what that means on a society-wide level. Because we hear about the individual car manufacturers closing down, and then there's the sort of inevitable media metabolization of that. So you'll have this sort of moment of, James O'Brien or whatever prominent Remainer it is running around saying, "See, we told you so," and it's almost like as if that's the punishment that people deserve. And I kind of think that the deeper irony and crisis at the heart of the Brexit project hasn't been explored. So I've done quite a lot of interviews with people who voted leave, and one of the really consistent things about it is wanting to return to a time in which employment was stable. You could organise communities around particular industries, and there was a sense of certainty in terms of your life trajectory. And what what specifically a no-deal Brexit would do is accelerate the disintegration of that. That's precisely what's being taken away. So there'll be this sort of full tilt towards an entirely or almost entirely services-based economy. And where there are jobs and where there is growth will be places like London. It's
Yeah.
not going to be for the regions that
and
were
even
already
where they
hit hard by
are
deindustrialisation.
even where they are traditional industries like arms industry, which is where I work on, the reality is what we've seen in the last 5 years is deals signed with Saudi Arabia to move the productive bases anyway over to Saudi Arabia, and Britain will be serving those productive bases. The Saudi Air Force can't fly without British servicing. 30,000 Brits are in Saudi Arabia at the moment, helping one way or another in the war effort. Huge numbers. But that it's basically even the arms industry is a service-based economy now. The actual heavy building of the bomb or of the aeroplane is slowly being leached
So that's
out
the real
anyway.
elite specialists at the very top of the company, right? Or
Well,
the very top of the production
Some
line.
of it's not elite specialists, but it is unstable work where you're expected to then go over and move to Saudi Arabia or move to wherever your client is for a few months. It is not the same kind of work where you have mass workplaces that you can organise and unionise in the same way that people expected. So it's not going backwards. It's very difficult to move back to what we had unless you really have a decent economic strategy, which probably Britain is not the right size for that now. When you've got global capitalism, you have to have an economic strategy that can fight back against that, and your economic unit then needs to be slightly bigger, probably at a European level. Maybe it will come a point where even Europe's not big enough to be able to fight the beast that is kind of global capital.
Do you have any intel, just looking at the short term, in terms of what France and Germany are going to offer May today, and ultimately what the EU 27 are going to offer May tomorrow?
What I'm hearing is France is kind of playing bad cop. Macron is concerned because he actually understands very much, because of what's happened with the Yellow Vests, that unless they propose positive things in Europe, the whole project can disintegrate. And not only that, the whole liberal project can disintegrate. And so he understands that the European elections are really important to try and put that alternative narrative. And he is really worried that it will be overshadowed by Brexit and Britain. And Britain, of course, the home of neoliberalism, would suck them into that whole discussion. Germany, a bit more, so France is kind of playing this kind of, we will not bend to your will. Germany is playing a bit more of a technocratic line of kind of, actually, if we can find a solution, we will go through. Those lines are totally consistent with the national myths of the foundations of both of those countries. The national myth of the foundation of France is that the French are always a resistance. Whether it's the First Republic, the Second Republic, or the French resistance in the war, the French stand up and they struggle, but they will not give in. Even though we know the reality is the French resistance probably did very little in the Second World War in terms of the length of the war. And the German national myth is that kind of populism and pure popular democracy is very dangerous. So what we need to focus on is productive bureaucracy. We need to make our industries very productive by creating a bureaucracy that kind of has a very complicated role for the workers, a role for the bosses, a role for everyone, providing a stake. And that's how Germany gets great again, and it avoids populism. And of course, Britain's national myth is that we stand apart. And we stand apart from Europe. We are a valiant, fighter. Even when Europe goes dark, we go we
We're
are
an
the
underdog
shining,
with an empire.
We are the shining light. The reality is, of course, that's a complete myth as well, because we only survived the war because of Stalin and maybe a bit of America, And so these national myths still play out in how the politics of Europe continues to move on. And you see that with Brexit, with this kind of whole harking back to, well, we survived the war alone, we can survive now alone. Well, yeah, we only just survived the war alone, and only because other people came and saved us.
And it's concretely playing out, that I've been reading in the FT, that Merkel is likely to offer, I don't know, a 9-month extension, a 12-month extension, whatever we feel is necessary. She's going to say, take some time.
Till the end of the year, yeah.
And Macron is saying, we should only give them the extension if they convince us that they're going to use it wisely, and also that we need to stop them, as you say, sort of blocking any European integrationist projects over the next 9 months. So potentially we're going to set some tough conditions, and then at a quarterly basis, I think it will sort of check if we've met them. I don't know if you think either of those, which will win out.
This could work with, there's a way around all of it so everyone comes away happy. So you have the extension until the end of the year, effectively, till December. And then you say there's going to be a few break clauses in this. It's a mutual break clause. that allows the Conservative side, May, to say, well, actually, it's not an extension until December, an extension where we can break it off any time or break it off at periodic moments. But Europe and the French will say, aha, but we also can break it off at any moments if Britain is playing in bad faith. So you might find a win-win kind of situation here, which the Conservatives were calling like a flex extension. Or
Flex extension, another portmanteau for us to play with.
Oh, I
Flex
hate this
existential
stuff.
crisis.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to take advantage of the fact that we've got an MP in the building as well. I almost researched today what the Cooper bill meant, and then I gave up. And I thought that you presumably researched it when you had to vote for it. Yeah. So last night, the Cooper bill passed, which means that Parliament is now in control of what kind of extension we will ask for. And Parliament should be able to, well, unilaterally, I suppose, resist a no deal.
Yeah.
Is that the case? And what's the significance of what happened last night?
The basic line is, you're right, that Parliament now can require the executive to go back and ask for an extension of the European Union, other member states, in any way. May was going back and asking for an extension, and we knew that, if you remember, the day before the Cooper bill, to try and kill it, May came out and said, I'm going to speak to Jeremy Corbyn and I'm going to ask for a slightly longer extension. And that's why the Cooper bill only passed by one vote, because lots of Conservatives said, oh, well, May's already now offered this. But the point of the Cooper bill is that she can't offer it and then withdraw it. You know, kind of, she's got an awful habit of withdrawing before we reach the final point.
I hate when people do that.
I knew you were going to... As soon as I said it, I knew...
Can be advisable, no?
Well, you know,
not a safe method, not surefire.
No.
No, I just go for it, in my view. But and we've seen that with some of the meaningful votes, that she's kind of withdrawn at the very last moment, just as we thought we were getting to the final point. And so the point of the Cooper bill is that if she tries to do that, Parliament can mandate her. And once the request is into Europe, they unilaterally, or kind of between all of them, can agree the extension time. And once the extension time is agreed in that European forum, that is the legal extension time that you get. And we then have to just kind of fall in line with it. What we're able to do is we're able to say no to an extension, and we're able to request an extension. The time period that extension is offered is then the negotiations, and we don't get to say, well, can we move it 3 days forward or not 3 days back? That's not our choice.
So there are two moving parts when it comes to deciding what happens next with Brexit.
Like a bicycle.
One is I actually can't ride a bicycle. This is my
Can you
secret
not?
shame. No. So long story, but mum, single parent family, sister always ill. So every single weekend when my mum was like, right, we're going to teach you how to ride a bike, either she would then have to, she'd get called into work and had to go, or my sister would be ill. So I got to the ripe old age of 26 without knowing how to ride a bike.
Well, we should put that to right.
I sort Brexit first, and then we can teach me to ride a bike.
There's a Labour cycling club that you can probably join, and they'll
Who's going to teach me?
Oh, we'll find someone.
Oh God, the humiliation.
Not me, because I'm awful. I've got no balance. So I've got no balance and no rhythm, and so cycling is just no.
All right, moving on from the short term.
Okay, there are two moving parts. There's.
Sorry, I was distracted.
Are you talking about bicycle now, or have you moved on as well? What
No,
two moving parts in terms of what?
Can I describe what the moving parts are? Not the bicycle.
Okay, go on.
But of Brexit. So you've got one aspect, which is this sort of internal parliamentary wrangling and the sort of, ballet of all the institutions that's going on above our heads. And then the second thing is the shifts in mood and perceptions amongst the electorate. And thinking about the campaigning you do with Love Socialism, Hate Brexit, the things you've been saying about the need for a second referendum, in your mind, what has changed in the minds of the electorate since 2016? Honestly, in probably 20% of the Leave electorate and 20% of the Remain electorate on the spectrum, nothing. Be very honest about it. The ultras on either side have not changed their view, I think, one jot. I think a lot of Remainers were at the very beginning willing to compromise,
They were willing to compromise. If there had been a vision given, okay, we're leaving Europe, but we're going to forge a new kind of Europe, forge a new world. I mean, I was chatting to Jeremy Corbyn a few months ago, and his view is that we extend Erasmus around the world, and we have kind of every student would spend maybe 6 months to a year studying in a foreign country, wherever that be, Africa, Latin America, Europe, and we would do it bilaterally. So we would have lots of people coming here, we would have lots of people going abroad. You would help increase kind of the university participation, but also the world view of people. You would increase the view of Britain for, if you've got lots of people coming and studying in Britain. And the problem is, if the government didn't articulate any of those kind of grand visions of what our role in Britain would be, and so a lot of Remainers were willing to compromise, and now they have actually resorted and they've dug in deeper. And I think that is what has partly changed on the Remain side, that you've seen a digging in of it. And I think on the on the middle ground, there are people that are slowly starting to say, God, this is a bit of a shit show. This is going on and on and on, and I just want it over. And the reality is, if we vote for May's deal, if we vote for any deal, even probably the Labour 6 test kind of deal, although you could argue that that's slightly different because it takes a lot of off-the-shelf stuff. It takes a lot of stuff that we already know about. But unless it meets all of those 6 tests, if it's any kind of other deal, that actually is 2 more years of negotiations. This is just the exit agreement. It's not the final stage. You've then got another 3 more years of negotiating external treaties. So you're talking about 5 years minimum of more negotiations, this dominating the news every night. And then you've got possibly further negotiations as the regulatory alignment stuff starts to change. So as Europe step up on issues, we will have to then step up as well, and you'll have all those debates. Now, when you tell that to people, most people on all sides turn around in kind of some sort of slash of dismay and shock. What the hell? We've got more of this. And so I think there is a feeling that people want this to end. And what that has led to, of course, is a polarisation. You now see a huge swathe of people saying, well, let's just go for no deal to end it. My view is that wouldn't end it, because then you'd be in WTO negotiations ongoing. And you have now a bigger swathe of people saying that they just want to remain. So it is a polarisation. But Labour has said very clearly that we would not go for no deal, that we think no deal is a disaster for jobs, but actually also because it is an ongoing negotiation that we'll always be the underdog on. And so I think there does come a point where you can say to the public, if you want this to end, you have to make a finite choice now, because Parliament will never do it. And so I'm not saying that the public have shifted wildly, although the polls say a bit of a shift to Remain. But what has happened is an entrenching of the public. And we need to work out from the Labour Party particularly about what part of that public we can please, and what part of that public we can say, well, we're not going to please you on Brexit, but we can provide material economic changes to your life. We can start to rebuild communities that have been abandoned and forgotten, but you're going to have to suck up being in the European Union, versus maybe other communities where, or other groups of people where we can say, well, we are going to remain in the European Union, but you're going to have to make changes in your life in terms of going on holiday and travel and etc. Everyone's going to have to take a hit, and if you've got a redistributed government, you're going to make people's lives better in some respects, but worse in others. So Labour needs to be very clever in understanding who we can please and who we can't.
So I just want to do a bit of context first in terms of love. I was going to say another Europe is possible, but your Love Socialism, Hate Brexit. It's a parliamentary group of left-wing MPs who are rallying the movement to back a second referendum.
So we are a group of left and centre-left MPs. I mean,
I was going to say, how does everyone on the same page about the Love Socialism bit?
Well, we had a discussion because, of course, Another Europe's Possible kind of coined the Love Corbyn, Hate Brexit phrase for conference. Some of us really wanted to use that as the tagline, and there was a discussion of,
I think it's a bit more dignified, to be honest, for MPs to have Love Socialism, Hate Brexit. Some people saying
that we thought that Love Socialism was a bit of a better thing. So that's what was chosen. And there is a variety of views. We've got about 18 regular members that you see signing up. Some well-known faces in terms of shadow cabinet and things, shadow front bench, not shadow cabinet. But we have had a shadow cabinet member speak at one of our events. Dawn came and spoke at one of the rallies that we.
So that's Dawn Butler.
We held. Yes, yeah.
And you've also got Kate Osamor, Marsha de Cordova, Clive Lewis.
Exactly, yeah. So you've got a good kind of bunch there. And the feeling that we felt was that one is that this debate was being dominated by the right, and sometimes it was even being used to try and damage Jeremy. And our view was that that was actually abhorrent, because this is a really important issue, and if you're using it just as a proxy to get your factional gain in the party, you're actually really abandoning the country when you need to come out and say this is the moral case. And part of our feeling was what had happened is the left had just kept their head down and thought, well, actually we'll just keep with the strategy, and so you allowed this vacuum of Remain voices to be dominated by the right. So we needed to speak out, partly to depersonalise this and talk about the issues, and the second point of coming around was because we felt that the moment was getting to a stage where we had to kind of bring together forces to probably push for a kind of second referendum, a confirmatory vote. None of us in our group are actual fans of a second referendum. None of us think that it will be a particularly positive thing, but all of us come to the conclusion it's probably the best way out of a very bad situation that the country has got ourselves in. And I think that is also the difference with some people that have a very kind of, the second referendum's going to solve this. In reality, what we all want is to probably remain in the European Union. Let's be honest, we're not really fans of a second referendum. We're fans of trying to remain and reform.
So here are my concerns, because I voted Remain, because I saw the array of racist nutter butters on the other side, and I was like, no way in hell am I sharing a ballot box with you. And since then I've been trying to think about how do I reconcile my preference is to remain in the EU, with my priority, which is achieve a socialist government. And that's the tussle that I'm in. Why is it a tussle? And the reason why I think it's a tussle is because of some of the hard facts about 78% of the Tory marginals that Labour need to win for a majority being in Leave seats, about the way in which 2017 was imagined as being a Brexit election, with the issue being used as a stick with which to beat Labour and to turn off swing voters. And for me, it's entirely a question of electoral calculation. Because I think that is the crux of the point that a lot of socialists, because the vast majority of socialists, even on the kind of in Parliament, on the soft Lexity side, actually see getting a Jeremy Corbyn government as a priority over kind of leaving or remaining. No, because the thing about Lexit is that it's not actually on offer. No. But if my reading of actually the electoral advantage and gain is that, to simplify it, that hardcore people who will be voting at the next general election, and I think the 2017 general election we managed to sidestep Brexit very well actually and talk about the material issues that affect people's lives. But it's a great moment of bait and switch. You're like, we're going to talk about Brexit, but actually... Yeah, but for those people who in the next election will be voting on the basis of Europe, they'll be in two camps. They'll be on a no-deal camp, and they will be on a Remain camp. No one who really wants a soft Brexit, a kind of good compromise, in my analysis, will actually be voting then in the general election on the basis purely of Brexit. They will be looking at the smorgasbord of other policies and making a judgment on what they think, because they are not only people that are more likely to be able to compromise, but they are also people whose Brexit is not the top of their priority issues. That's why they're willing to compromise on this issue. And the hardcore leavers are no dealers now. And so the hardcore leavers, if that is the only issue that they are going to be satisfied with a hardcore leave Brexit, kind of no deal Brexit, we're just not going to satisfy them. So we've kind of lost them anyway. Whereas the hardcore Remainers, actually a lot of them, there's still a potential that we can help win back and keep with us. And even in the most leavey of seats, at least 50%, and in probably most seats, apart from a handful, the majority of the Labour vote, even in the Leave seats, was Remain. Because, and you can do the maths, you add up the UKIP vote in those seats, you add up the Tory vote, which split about 70-30, and all then you need to do is work out what the rest of the Labour vote you need to make up the majority that Leave got in that seat.
And I did the calculations on Jarrow, for example, the other day, and it showed that 51% of the Labour vote in that seat would have voted Remain. Just if you do that calculation that way, nothing fancy. Everything that's kind of that's the danger, is you lose that Remain vote that you've got in Jarrow, and you also lose the seat.
But that was what the breakdown of referendum data done by Warwick University, I think it was, said, which is, you can have all these social and economic indicators of how people were likely to vote, but the thing that would turn someone who indicated leave into a Remain voter or vice versa was whether or not they voted Conservative or Labour at the previous election. Yeah. But the other thing, and these are, I'm treating you as like, a kind of second referendum agony aunt, because this is the kind of thing which I go to sleep, gnashing and wailing my teeth, wailing my teeth, gnashing my teeth and wailing.
Wailing your teeth.
Wailing my teeth, that's how bad it is, just wailing my teeth.
And gnashing.
And gnashing. I was talking to a Labour whip a couple of weeks ago, who I bumped into, and I was like, all right, come on, mate, level with me, what's going on with Brexit? And we were going back and forth, and I was like, well, here's my sense of what you would have to do in terms of general election, which is offer to renegotiate and put it to a confirmatory referendum. That's all you could do to please both sides of your electoral coalition.
And that would be a very sensible outcome of the election that I think would provide us to be able to, again, talk about the material issues of people's lives.
But one of the things that he said was, look, if we come out and back a second referendum in full throat, we're going to get killed in the north. And I was like, oh, come on, I've had a look at the data, it's not that bad. And he went, no, that's not what I mean. I mean that Labour MPs in Leave seats are receiving, even now, death threats, harassment and abuse on a scale which has got lots of them genuinely afraid for their lives. Yeah. And what they're worried about is, in the event of a second referendum, they will become targets for far-right extremist terrorists, the way that Joe Cox was for Thomas Mayer.
And there is a real danger in that. And it's something that was raised actually at the PLP this week.
So the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Yeah. So every Monday, all the MPs meet. And it was a joyous meeting today, this week, because we had a new MP joining us, so it started off well. And then, of course, as always, we end up arguing over many things. So there was a heated discussion on many issues, but Brexit was one of them. And it boils down to, we understand all of the facts that Labour MPs will be targeted, and there's a real danger. So do you as a party change your position because of that? Do you effectively allow terrorism to win? The message of Ken Livingstone after the 7/7 bombings was, London is going to get out and we're going to open up our shops and we're going to keep on our business the day after. And do you then allow the threat of right-wing terrorism suddenly to provoke a different response from you?
No, but my question is...
But so then the party's response shouldn't be a policy change. The party's response should say, we understand that things are now very difficult. So maybe actually we do need to employ more security. Maybe we do need to employ bodyguards and support for those people. And it is a difficult moment that you get through. But do you allow that resentment? And that resentment exists there. It's not just being invented by Brexit. It exists there in those communities. But there comes a point where it has got... Do you just paper over the cracks and hope that it will go away? Or do you actually need to confront it? And you need to say, we think that there is a majority in this country that are decent people that are not going to be fooled by this real minority of loons, right-wing terrorists, who are going to try and hijack this issue, and we're going to be able to pursue a policy. Or do you change your policy because you're worried about it? And I would prefer the other one.
I mean, I'm inclined to agree, but having first-hand experienced some of the racist abuse and harassment after the referendum result, and since then having kept a fairly close eye on how far-right organising tactics have changed, how they've been able to grow, how they've been able to see their talking points repeated back to them by Tory MPs, people in power, people who are considered part of, the legitimate discourse, has me very concerned for how that referendum would play out. And one of the things that concerns me especially is that any polarisation between no deal and no Brexit would benefit the argument for no deal, because it has the side of, well, we already have a democratic mandate and that was given in 2016. And what you're doing is you're gifting the far right, who have been fringe for so long, a mainstream talking point to build on, rather than saying, well, you know what, the mandate in 2016 and 2017 was for a soft Brexit compromise. Here you are, that's your referendum fulfilled.
That's where there wasn't really we don't know what the mandate was after the last referendum. It was a big fudge because it was so close. I think that's why most people who want a kind of confirmatory vote is they're talking about a confirmatory vote on the deal. They're saying there is a soft Brexit here, Theresa May's deal, and if you are a real Brexiteer, I mean, the reality is if you're a Brexiteer, you should be voting. I'm not going to say this, I shouldn't say this because I don't want them to vote for it. But you're voting for a bloody deal. Because in 5 years' time, you can tear up a lot of the things. It's only the Northern Ireland backstop that's getting them all agitated.
And when they're not in coalition with the DUP, they can just leave Northern Ireland in a customs union and we can leave it.
Exactly. So I don't actually understand. So what you do is you put that back to the people and you say, look, there is a form of Brexit here that probably fulfills most of what you wanted versus remaining. Is this actually what you wanted now?
So would no deal be on the ballot?
Well, my preference now, and I've changed my mind and I am liable to change again because I think it's a movable feast, is that you wouldn't, if it was a May deal or a version of May deal, no deal wouldn't be on the ballot paper. If it was a customs union or a kind of EEA Norway plus, I think then you increase the danger of having to put no deal on the ballot, because those aren't really leave options. They are giving up all control options but following all the rules.
And what kind of no deal, because no deal has a variety of meanings, what kind of no deal would be on the ballot?
Well, this is the difficulty. If you put no deal on the ballot, it is a bit of a vacuum of, do you mean no deal under WTO rules? Well, we don't have preferential status under the WTO at the moment, because we have preferential status in the WTO only because we're members of the European Union, because the European Union is a member of the WTO. WTO was only created in the 90s, so we've been a member of the European Union longer than we have WTO. We would have to reapply for preferential status in the WTO, which Russia has been dragging its heels and blocking our current process to get that. So a no deal is very unsure about what that would mean legally. Whereas if you're going back to the people, what you're doing is Parliament would have to effectively pass all the regulations for either remaining or May's deal. And effectively the referendum is the trigger of whether those laws are enacted or not. And so in those laws, you say the day after the referendum, without the Prime Minister touching this at all, the deal will come into power. And it gives certainty that politicians can't mess around with it. The problem is, as soon as you put no deal on the table, what you will have to then have is it will go back to Parliament and you'll have another 2-3 years of this. So it's a way also of removing politicians who are extremely divided, either like me, because I come from a Remain seat and I can be quite comfortable in my seat, even though I had a man come up and try and attack me on the street, grab my glasses and all that kind of thing. Possibly I had told him that I disagreed with him in a rather forthright manner, but kind of this is the argy-bargy of politics.
You should hire me. It can be like a completely sexless and gender-reversed remake of The Bodyguard. It would be great.
I'm not sure the sex bit is going to happen though.
The sexless.
Oh, sexless. Oh, I see. I missed.
Don't get excited.
I thought you were. I thought you were. Sorry, I thought
sexless.
You were.
Ever since I got elected to Westminster, everyone's just offering their sex.
I'm not sure the sex bit is going to happen, my dear.
You're watching Novara Media. You're watching Tisky Sour. This is only possible because of your kind support. If you are already a subscriber to Novara Media, thank you. You are what makes this possible. You are the reason we will continue expanding throughout 2019. If you are not already, please go to support.novaramedia.com. And our ask is for the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, so we can continue working around the clock. As ever, if you are not already, please subscribe to this show. Not this show, this channel. Please subscribe to the Novara Media channel. Please like this video because it means it appears in more people's news feeds. Share it on Twitter. Share it on Facebook.
And we're trying to fight the alt-right algorithm on YouTube. So the more you like and the more you subscribe, the less likely it is you're going to have to see Ben Shapiro's face pop up when you're just trying to watch, like, I don't know, a Nigella recipe.
Is that how it happens?
That is what happens.
I want to ask a slightly different question. So my worry here with, well, especially Another Europe is Possible, who you're somewhat sort of in touch with them, right? So Another Europe is Possible is not the MP version of We Want a Second Referendum. That's the more grassroots, potentially.
So there's on the left of kind of the spectrum broadly. You've got socialists love socialism, hate Brexit, and then you have this kind of Another Europe's Possible, and you also have a kind of Best for Britain, which was founded by.
So they're not the leftist ones; they're the centrists, right?
Or I would say Best for Britain are probably centre left.
Mm-hmm.
I would say Another Europe's Possible is leftish, and then I would say the People's Vote campaign is centre to centre right.
Yeah.
So that's how I would kind of phrase it, and Best for Britain therefore provides an interesting bridge between the different kind of camps, and Love Socialism, Hate Brexit ends up working very closely with Another Europe's Possible and for Best for Britain, because sometimes we need people who are the bridge into the other camp.
I just want to get up your latest Labour list article as well. A confirmatory public vote is our bottom line. And the reason I bring it up is because it links into, I suppose, my concern about the left Remain campaigns, other than all the things that Ash has talked about. Mm-hmm. But I think what you're saying is why I'm, and I think you are as well, sort of agnostic about a second referendum. I see pros and cons to it happening. And if it's required to keep Labour's constituency together, fuck it, let's do it. Yeah. But my concern with the left Remain campaigns and the left People's Votes campaigns is I still think the most likely thing that will happen is some sort of soft Brexit deal is negotiated between Labour and the Tories. I don't think there will be enough support in Parliament for a second referendum. I think a lot of people who voted for a People's Vote voted for it tactically, or voted for it as sort of quid pro quos for other MPs voting for Common Market 2.0, and only voted for it because they knew it wouldn't win, right? And so my concern is you've got a lot of left-wingers who are basically giving the grassroots false hope, or the Remain elements of the grassroots false hope, who are saying, you don't have to compromise. You should not accept anything less than the opportunity to reverse Brexit. And my instinct is to say that what the left should have been doing, and what some sections of the left have been doing since the result 2.5 years ago, is to say, look, we completely understand you're upset about the result, but there was a democratic mandate for leaving. We are pro-European, but we're also pro-democracy. That unless there's sort of a fundamental abrogation of human rights, then if someone votes to leave a trading bloc, you probably should. And so the job of the left should have been to make people who voted Remain come to terms with the fact that a compromise would be necessary. And what Another Europe is Possible and other left Remainers campaigns have done, and I don't think they've been primarily responsible for it. I think the fault is really the shit show that the Tory party have given, and have sort of, I think they've done more to increase polarisation than anyone on the left, is basically what I'm saying. But I worry that you guys on the left Remain side have helped encourage this polarisation, which is ultimately probably going to damage Labour if a second referendum doesn't happen, because it's going to lead to disappointment, and also creates unnecessary divisions in society, because understandably it gives many people who voted Leave an idea that liberals in major cities, people who normally win elections, people who are used to winning, will not accept any kind of compromise and will never accept defeat, even if it just means we stay basically in the single market, basically in the customs union, but we don't have the flag with the 27 stars on it.
I mean, most people who voted Brexit have the government that they also voted for, and most people who voted, this kind of idea that everyone that voted Brexit is kind of a left behind kind of town. Most of our shires, conservative to the bone, voted to leave.
Yeah, I think Broxbourne's doing all right. I don't think it was that hard hit by Thatcher.
And so I think we've got to be a bit careful about the nuance that it's kind of.
I mean, I didn't say that.
No. But kind of, there's this kind of narrative that it's this. What you did say is the people in metropolitan areas that always get their way in.
Well, they have on this question, and I suppose
they haven't on this.
The
question,
reason to justify that,
and they didn't effectively at the general election, and they didn't because most people in the city of London and all of the metropolitan areas across the country are liberal or left. And this is a coalition between Labour only wins when we get the coalition of Liberal and Left. I mean, that's our historic way that we've always managed to garner enough of the votes from the very beginning. When we left the Liberal Party to form our own party, we still required some of that Liberal vote to come with us, the radical Liberals and everything. But I think we've got to be careful to kind of present it as it's kind of a metropolitan versus non-metropolitan. Labour is the party of metropolitan areas. actually. Let's be clear. Labour is not the party historically of rural areas. It never has been. I think it's a shame. That's because we never had a real agrarian revolution in this country, and we can talk about that. Peasants' revolts had been put down and they'd never really been successful properly, different from in other countries. So Labour actually does have a duty to make sure that we represent those people. But what you're kind of saying is that we should have prepared the base for defeat. Well,
also said that we can still be an outward-looking, open society which is liberal, tolerant, multicultural, whilst having a different formal relationship to the trading bloc that is the EU. I don't think we should have abandoned liberalism.
And I think in a theoretical way, that would have been possible. And I think at the beginning, people did. At the beginning, people did vote for compromises. Labour put down those 6 tests. We went in and we said, these are the kinds of things that we need to kind of negotiate for. What's been clear is Labour's 6 tests and that compromise, which is a compromise. It's not what Labour wanted, but Labour kind of grudgingly respected, has also been voted down kind of numerous times in Parliament, and iterations of it have been voted down numerous times in Parliament. And what many of us said on the campaign trail in the referendum was the very worst would be a kind of Norway, because my analysis of what happened with Norway is actually that helps the far right far more, because what happens is the far right come away saying we won that vote, we've left, but we're still following all the rules. And so you still get all the anger, you still get all the frustration, because they feel like the liberal elite, as it were, have stitched it up. They've stitched it up and they haven't even kind of gone back. You can't even say you've gone back to the people, because we have actually stitched it up. Because a Norway option is a stitch up. Norway is, let's accept all the rules, let's accept all the free movement, let's accept everything. This is what Common Market 2.0 basically is. It's Norway plus. We accept all the rules. And that leaves a really awful anti-democratic taste in the mouth. I mean, people who are saying, look, we think this is a tragic mistake. In democracy, you allow minority voices to continue to be heard. In democracy, you do put tests back to the people at regular intervals. And my view is that the referendum was a mandate to negotiate honestly and truly and offer a Brexit that could work. That is what May has effectively got. I think it is a disaster, and so does a lot of Remainers think it's a disaster for the country. The democratic thing is putting it back to the people. The undemocratic thing is doing some smoke-filled room kind of stitch-up. And what you see in Norway now is this bizarre situation where the leader of every single mainstream party in Norway is in favour of joining Europe. Every single trade union is in favour of joining Europe. Every single business is in favour of joining Europe. But they can't garner the popular support of the people. And slowly, in Scandinavian countries, you see that now rise of the far right, and we of course see it in an awful way in some of our sister parties in Scandinavia as well.
Does that connection work though? Because you see the rise of the far right in Norway and in Sweden. Mm-hmm. Sweden's in the EU, Norway's in a non-EU relationship. I don't see the relationship.
And I was going to say, I think that's got less to the rise of the far right in Norway and Sweden has less to do with institutional arrangements between those countries and the EU, and has much more to do with issues around national identity, around the idea of the presence of Muslims being an existential threat to the nation, to the people, to the culture, and that's the thing which I kind of want to loop into this discussion.
Right. But is that not the basis of the far right rise really here? Is that not, we're talking about Brexit, but really we should be talking about the fact that these other things are causing the rise of the far right. We shouldn't be using it.
And that's the thing that I wanted to move on to, actually, is that, in saying that, well, actually, I think that Norway is the worst of all worlds, is that I worry that you are validating the far right far too much, because actually I don't think very many people care about the precise institutional arrangements between the UK and the EU. I think the reason why Brexit went from being a fringe to a mainstream issue in the course of a relatively short period of time is because Britain has, enjoyed, by virtue of its former imperial status, a half-in, half-out relationship to the EU. It was 1 foot in, one foot out. You have all these opt-outs. And you also have a political class, and this was the thing which, Boris Johnson was the master at concocting and wielding and firing up, which is happy to blame the EU for anything that you don't like in this country, and do it in a way which is like, look at these people, they're so unreasonable.
And all the good things, the requirement to introduce a national minimum wage, disability, discrimination, all of those stuff, you never hear us going on about how fantastic the EU was. In fact, what you hear is us saying, in 97, when Labour came in, we introduced the national minimum wage, we introduced the Disability Discrimination Act. Yeah, all required by EU law. But we never say that second part, do we? We pretend that we take the glory, and so when it's good, we pretend it's British, and when it's bad, I'm agreeing with you, we pretend it's European.
And at the same time, there has been and this was the thing which I was in a very roundabout way looping back to, is use migrants as a very convenient figure, an embodiment of all those changes that you're experiencing that you don't like. They're an embodiment of your loss of control over the political landscape, the social landscape, your immediate surroundings as well. And that's something which New Labour played like an absolute fiddle. David Blunkett was, an artiste at that. It was something which David Cameron did very well. And then suddenly you've got all these figures saying, no, stay in the EU. My concern with brushing off Norway is that you're saying, oh, look, it's the worst of all worlds. You don't get your control back. You don't get this back. You don't get that back. Well, actually, it gives you the space to say, we fulfilled the result of your referendum, which is, severing ties with this political institution that you don't like as much as we can. But what we're going to do is build consent and make the argument for something like freedom of movement. And I feel that was a wasted opportunity.
I think that we tried to do that. I think that Labour I was not a proponent. I spoke against pushing for a people's vote early on in the PLP. I spoke up about that, and numerous of us did. So I agree with a lot of your political analysis of where we've come from. But the question is, where are we now? What are the solutions out of this madness? How do we get out of it? If we could, without an awful backlash, just revoke Article 50 and end this madness, I would do it. I suspect that will be accusations of a greater democratic outrage, actually. Now, I think there is a case to be made about saying, and it might well be, it has to be after a referendum, so after a general election, not before. Kind of Labour's manifesto pledge becomes, we will try and negotiate a new deal and put it back. But somewhere along that process, I think we probably now need a confirmatory vote. One, because time has lapsed. By the way, I don't buy the argument that so many people have died and so many new people have gone to the referendum, because actually over 80-year-olds voted predominantly Remain. It was kind of a hump in if you look at
it was the boomer hump, the baby boomer hump.
The pop psychology is that 80s, that people in their 80s still remember the war.
Yeah, but I'm not
I don't know if that's true.
Well, it is interesting.
My grandma can't remember much of anything.
My grandmother came over, German, came over to Britain, and all barring my dad of her children voted Leave. I went to visit her. She's bedridden now, but I went to visit her a few months ago, and she pulled me over to the bed and she said, "Don't tell the others, Lloyd, but I voted Remain because I can remember what it was like." So maybe the pop psychology is true. Right. Yeah. I don't know.
That's enough evidence for me.
On that level, kind of maybe it's kind of right. But so actually, the ageing demographic may actually hurt the Remain cause. So let's not pretend just because of. But time allows space for new thinking. Time allows space for different approaches. And I think it is dangerous to set a precedent that says you can never come back to an issue. Now, so then you get to an argument of, do you have to have fully implemented the referendum decision before you can ever put this back to the people? And my analysis is we'll never fully implement this referendum decision for, even if you have kind of a no-deal Brexit, you're going to be then in negotiations with the EU, discussions around how things happen, for, as I say, 5-10 years. And so you're saying that you've got to wait 5, 10, 20, 30 years before you can ever even engage in this issue. After 75, the people who wanted to leave immediately organised and started to make their case. And so I don't think that we should be ruling out a period of time to be able to make that case and saying, oh no, you need to have a truce in that period. I think if there is a groundswell of feeling that it's a way of putting this issue to bed, and of course it won't put the issue to bed in the public. It won't put the issue to bed in the kind of general politic, but it will put the issue to bed in Parliament and allow Parliament to then deal with the material issues that affect people. And if Parliament doesn't deal with the material issues that affect people and continues to focus on Brexit, that is, I think, actually the bigger danger for democracy. People start to say, hang on a second, you can pass all this emergency legislation when it comes to Brexit, in one day the Cooper Bill, but what the sweet FA are you doing about universal credit? You can pass all this emergency indicative votes on our future relationship, but what are you doing about my local school or my local hospital or housing that is in disarray? And there's a real problem that if we don't start getting Parliament talking about serious issues, we undermine fundamentally the very basis of British democracy.
And what if Remain loses? What if No Deal won on a three-way ballot?
If it was a three-way ballot and No Deal won, we would be in an extremely difficult situation, and I would be incredibly depressed. But it would be life, wouldn't it? And you would have to pick yourself up. I would, of course, then make, assuming that this is a ballot that is an automatism, so it's not a ballot that says Parliament goes back and negotiates a deal. So we have kind of three option deals that have already worked out. It automatically happens. To some extent, I don't get a choice. I can continue a campaign, and I probably would continue a campaign, just like comrades in Norway, just like other people, to say we want to go back in the European Union eventually. And probably I would be on a long journey to get there, to get the public on my wavelength. But it would be my democratic right as a politician and as a citizen to continue that fight. Just like when women lost the vote twice in Ireland for abortion, the next day they got out there and they started organising to have another referendum very quickly so they could get their right for abortion. In Taiwan last year, when they lost the vote for gay marriage, what we actually said to people in Taiwan who are campaigning on this, we said, find any way possible legally to stop it. Stop it in the courts, stop it in Parliament. Yes, it's a referendum, but this is your right to try and stop what you think is a moral outrage. Now, I think we've got to be careful about just saying Europe is some moral outrage of that level, but I think we also have to recognise that a lot of this discussion isn't really about trade anymore. It is about how we see ourselves. It is about whether we see ourselves as European. And I know from the southeast, I visited France and I have family in Germany, and far more than the first time I went to Scotland was when I was 20. Kind of in terms of what binds the union together.
Feeling European isn't a human right, because then you'd say so say if Scotland won the independence referendum, and then the British people in Scotland say, but I feel British, I have a connection to London, and therefore I'm not going to respect the result of the referendum because it's my identity.
They would continue to campaign, wouldn't they?
You can continue to campaign, but trying to stop it in the courts is somewhat different, right?
Well, they would, wouldn't they? The word respecting result is a funny word, but I think there is an interesting crux here about citizenship. And our understanding of citizenship is still based on this Westphalian kind of model of a kind of geographic territory that is drawn, and that turned into the kind of the understanding that we have in the Montevideo Convention, where if you have a subunit within another country, you could declare independence and you could have nationality. The European Union started to move nationality in a very different way. It started to destroy the importance of nationality at the nation-state level and started to allow people to actually, maybe a minority, but some people to be able to see themselves beyond British. And actually, in my view, it cleansed Britishness that had a really negative history and a really negative connotation. And the same is, in my view, has happened in France and in Germany and Belgium. It allowed these post-colonial countries that the reason that the colonies had existed is because they were in competition with each other. Britain was in competition with France, and so it was a race to see who could conquer the rest of the world more. Britain was in the race against Spain, and it was who could conquer the rest of the world. If you stop these countries fighting each other, you bring them together, you create a post-colonial world, but also you create a post-nationalistic world. And that was the direction of travel that I think some of us, not all, a minority maybe, were trying to push the European Union in.
Lloyd, you had me, and then you lost me. and this is exactly where you lost me. Because
tell me, it is interesting, yeah.
Simple question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think as many Black and Asian minority ethnic people who voted Remain consider themselves European as part of their identity as white people who voted Remain?
Probably not, because identity is a very multi-layered, multifaceted thing, and it might well be in some BAME communities they do, and in other BAME communities they don't, because also BAME communities in that sense are very multifaceted as well.
I
think
would
it's
argue
difficult.
it's not just about identity and the layering of identity. It's also about the layering of history.
Yep.
So this analysis of
but identity is based on history.
Of Europeanness allows Britain, France, Italy to cleanse itself of its colonial past. Well, you know what? Say that to the people who have made the journey across land from sub-Saharan Africa through Libya, been detained, and then drowned in the Mediterranean. Mm-hmm. You can't tell me that the European project and European identity, which has been constructed institutionally by defining itself against the restriction of such freedoms to people from the global south, cleanses itself of coloniality.
No, I think you make a good point there. I think it's a bit unfair to blame the European Union on the migrants drowning in the Mediterranean. I think that there are European Union states that are continuing to allow that to happen. It is their waters. The European Union doesn't per se support that. In fact, the European Union was supporting funding for vessels to continue going out until very recently, despite the objections of those countries, and it's only stopped because Italy has effectively invoked its powers to prevent the European Union continuing to
It goes back longer than that.
But I get your point.
There was more ease of migration for people from North African countries, for instance, up until the 1980s when Schengen starts kicking in. Then you have a sort of parallel restriction of those rights.
There were more ease of migrants, whatever your background and whatever your nationality, pre-1900. And from 1900 onwards, we have seen a ramping up of restrictions, whether it be on the Mexican border and the US, whether it be anywhere. And in fact, passports didn't exist as we know them now until the 20th century. And so you've seen an arc of stronger and stronger restrictions. And the only way that we've been able to reduce those restrictions is try and create units like the European Union. And now that has been based on very flawed ideas around economic prosperity and probably people that look, sound and seem the same as the majority in the respective countries.
The word white is just one syllable.
It's not as simple as just saying white, because there's also a discrimination between what Brits perceive as white French versus Brits perceive as white Bulgarian. So that's what I was trying to avoid using that, but levels of whiteness maybe is a way you could describe it in a very crude kind of way. And I get that there's a problem there, but the question is, how do you deal with it? Do you deal with it by trying to smash the whole thing down? And my view is the danger is what you end up to is going back on the trajectory of toughening visa immigration requirements, or do you start to build blocks that can cooperate together? So what you see in between Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania now and other countries in that region is the developing of a free movement bloc where you can move, work freely, and they base it on the European model. And now Europe negotiates with that bloc on wholesale. We have complete free trade between that region, between Kenya and the European Union. There are no trade barriers at all on anything apart from arms, which I personally would ban arms trades entirely, so I've got nothing wrong with that. And now there is discussions about how you can start to make visa liberalisation between those trade blocs. And so do you see that as a way of getting to a stage where we can right the wrongs of building these walls and fences, which you're quite right have been built? Or do you see a way of kind of destroying the bloc and in this kind of chaos, and I say chaos rather than anarchy, because anarchy is a system of governance and chaos is a system of nothingness, kind of in that chaos you hope something to come out. My view is the danger is in that chaos, in this period in time, the likelihood is likely to come out is the rise of really right-wing nationalism. It's very dangerous. In a different period of time, in 10 years' time, or if we manage to change the world quicker than that, I actually think there is a really good case for breaking up the European Union. My analogy, and I don't mean this sometimes people balk at this analogy, my analogy is that I think there's a really good academic case to break up the United States. Really spot on. It's too big, it's too centralised, the president has too much power, etc., etc. If during the American Civil War, you were trying to make those kinds of academic arguments about why America was going to be a superpower. Not only were you a genius because you could see in the future, but actually you just weren't seeing the time and the place. The Confederates who were trying to break up the USA were doing it for the wrong reasons or the wrong motivations, and no matter how much of a good socialist or anarchist or anarcho-syndicalist or whatever you would have been, and there were anarcho-syndicalists around at that time who maybe wouldn't have used that tag but would have had those kinds of views of self-organisation, you would have been siding for the wrong people with the Confederalists, and you probably would have been not a racist yourself, but you would have been enabling a system that was propagating racism. That is my view of where we are in Brexit now. There are very good friends of mine in the PRP have present to me very, very good arguments for why Lexit is a really potentially good argument, of why actually we just need to respect the referendum result, and maybe we do break up the EU, and maybe in that breakup, us leaving the EU, something grows in between that's amazing, and we get kind of Corbynism. My view is that actually that is less likely, and my view is it's more likely to get a Labour government with Jeremy Corbyn if we fight a kind of Remain corner. And it's an analysis that I could be totally wrong on, but I actually don't think there's going to be any winners, or there's going to be there's no solution where everyone's a winner and everyone's a loser. There's going to be there's a bit of a greyness in the middle.
I mean, look, I'm not a Lexiter because I think it's a phenomenal political analysis, but that doesn't mean it's a viable political project.
Yeah.
I've got one more question, and then I'm going to take questions from the audience. So post them in the comments. Ash, I know I promised you we'd finish on the dot at 9, and we haven't. Mm-hmm. So you have the option of leaving before the YouTube questions come in.
Tell what, I will stay. I will stay for. Oh.
Anyway, if you want to up and it will be acceptable.
I've got to go, guys.
Yeah?
I really have to go. But thank you for joining us.
No, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Ash. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on the live stream. I'm so sorry that I've got to duck out. Normally I really love answering your questions and your comments. But I got a hot date, so bye.
Yeah. Good night, Ash. Lloyd, my one question for you before we get to the audience. Mm-hmm. This article, a confirmatory public vote is our bottom line. It seems to me at least plausible that Corbyn is going to come out, not this week, but over the next 9 months with some sort of deal with Theresa May that sort of ends up with us staying in a customs union or aligned to the single market, and there isn't a second referendum. You are on the front bench. You're the PPS to Richard Bergen. If that happens and there isn't a confirmatory public vote as part of the deal, what do you do?
I have a very, as with all votes where I disagree slightly, and there've been many votes, not many, but there've been a number of votes where I've disagreed. I didn't really, on the indicative votes, agree to vote for a customs union Common Market 2.0, but I was persuaded by my colleagues that it was good to keep options open, to see if we could get something through Parliament, and so I kind of voted for it. They would have to persuade me, and we would have long discussions about it. My personal view is that Corbyn would be in a very difficult situation if he compromised fundamentally on some of those key 6 tests, which have kind of been boiled down into 3 phrases now, but actually is much more complex, which is kind of regulatory alignments, customs union, single market, and workers and protections. But it also includes no border in Northern Ireland, effectively working for the regions and nations, and protecting our security, which was actually the original lines. If we were not protecting our security, then I think that I would really struggle to vote for it. If I really believed that it would abandon Northern Ireland, when the Northern Irish people don't want that, then I would really struggle to vote for it. So I would then be in a real difficult situation. I don't believe, and there's always a difficulty that we put so many hypotheticals. If he does this and comes back with this, what would you do? Well, I'd see at the time. I don't believe Jeremy and Keir will. Keir was very clear that Northern Ireland and security and those issues that I've just listed to you would be red lines for him. Now,
that could be sorted without a second referendum, right? If you had a sort of shared market situation, then ultimately they'd come back and your bottom line, which is a confirmatory referendum, would not have been met.
6 tests. So if you have a compromise, if it's a compromise on Theresa May's deal, the compromise indicates that we've shifted from our 6 tests as well, then a second referendum is the bottom line. If you get the 6 tests exactly as we've pledged them, then I would struggle to vote against them.
All right, I'm collecting questions now.
You get where I'm coming from.
I get where you're coming from.
But we're all talking about angels on the heads of pins here.
Politicians' answer, but there's nothing wrong with that.
We're not in a situation where we're anywhere near those tests. Theresa May's been totally transigent.
All right, you've got to get your crystal ball out now.
I'm awful
Not crystal
at this.
boil. Johnny asks, what are the prospects for a general election or May going? If May goes, could the Tories lurch to the right?
If May goes, the Tories will lurch to the right. I'm pretty confident of that. The Tory leadership works where the party puts up two candidates and the membership then choose out of those two. And the membership will choose the most right of those two. And is there a chance of a general election?
Is there a chance of a general election?
I think a chance of a general election is very high, actually. My analysis is us pledging for us pushing in those negotiations with Theresa for a second referendum pushes us closer to a general election as well, because her ultras, her ERG fanatics, will not countenance a second referendum on her deal and Remain. They will see that as absolute disaster. That is what's far more likely to trigger a general election. So calling for a second referendum, if it is just for the effect of trying to have a general election where we can put this issue to bed and we can get Jeremy Corbyn in, it is worth it just on those fronts.
James Simpsons, what are Lloyd's opinions on Twitter FBPEers, so follow back pro-EUers, and by the way, love you Lloyd. So there's a...
My view on them is that they're probably very unhelpful. The one that really gets me is this kind of for our future's sake ones, of course, because their hashtag is
FSS,
FFS.
for fuck's sake.
And I'm like, well, why are you saying for fuck's sake at me? Look, Twitter is a cesspit of all different people and all different views, and I contribute to that probably in an unhealthy way as much as they contribute to it in an unhealthy way. And I don't think they help move the debate on, is my view. But that criticism can probably be accused of me as well.
Ibrahim Mohammed, what could be done if somehow Boris is PM negotiating a hard Brexit? That's sort of worst case scenario for you. So May gets replaced, Boris takes over, and in this, it was an article in Conservative Home today that was apparently being shared in Tory WhatsApp groups, which was to say, get the 9-month extension, get rid of May straight away, and get a right-wing Tory PM who can negotiate something like what's that compromise they made? The Malthouse compromise, where you have a sort of managed no deal.
Yeah.
What do you do in that situation?
Well, actually, that would be a situation, again, that I would think will most likely precipitate a general election. Because there are people on the Remain side, Dominic Greaves is a good example, that have said very clearly they would resign from the party if Boris became... I'm not one generally to take the view that you need to try and create chaos to build something positive. I think that Naomi Klein writes a very interesting book of how the Chicago boys do that. Mm-hmm. I think that as leftists we need to try and not play that same game.
You're not into a shock doctrine from the left?
I was at one point in my life, and people laughed at me when I mentioned it at a meeting once in London in the 2000s, late 2000s. But I think that on this issue, actually, a Boris shock would tear the Conservative Party apart. And it is also a reason why we must not trust anything Theresa May says. There is a danger if Jeremy does agree a deal. The deal is signed. It's not legally binding. No parliament can bind a future parliament. Boris gets in. We have a general election. Jeremy would be the only leader. And Vince Cable's going anyway. So Jeremy would be the only leader standing that had signed the deal. And there would be a real danger that he would be the one left holding the turd. So we need to make sure in all those scenarios that the Conservatives hold this mess. Conservatives own what they've got this country into, and then the Conservatives are wiped out of the next general election.
Question, what's Lloyd's, this is from Phil BC, what's Lloyd's view on the likelihood of a proper split in the Tory party? So to put, I suppose, one position, very unlikely. So you see the odd sort of outlier in the Tory party who was left over Brexit, but they're a party that's very averse to splitting I mean, from the cynical perspective, one would say because they're only interested in power and they're not particularly ideologically motivated in the same way that Labour MPs can be.
They're interested in power and money.
So you think that might cause a split?
No. I think that makes it easier for them not to split, because those who lose power can be paid off with money. So it does mean that's why the Conservatives are the longest running party of governance, or government, kind of having periods of government in the world, because they are able to transform and reform. What you will see is a transformation of the party, and you will see people drifting away. Will there be a bigger split? Well, with Boris, actually, that really increases the likelihood.
You think people could go to the Tiggers or the Cucks?
Yes, the Cucks might get it. Chucker's party. I call them the Tinge party, but the Tinge party might get there. But I think the likelihood is actually that Boris will be in that final 2 ballot, and there will be another leaver, someone like Penny Mordaunt, who's Secretary of State for International Development, who has this kind of panache of being a bit of a kind of go-getter girl. You're a bit fun, but actually she's deadly serious. She's a hard Brexiteer. She's with Boris on these things, but she has a front to allow her to do some deadly things, and she wouldn't cause a split in the Conservative Party. So actually it's not Boris that I worry about, it's those others that I worry about. If Boris got in, as I said, I think that would precipitate a general election and possibly a split. But the Conservatives are good at stitching these things up.
Watch out for Penny Mordaunt.
Well, or someone like her, yes.
Michael Gove? Is that a similar situation? He's
Michael Gove has managed to rehabilitate himself a bit, hasn't he? Yeah.
Juliet Jakes asks, if you don't respect the result of the first referendum, why should anyone respect the result of a second?
The third, I think she means. But yes, we had one in 75.
They waited 40 years, though, didn't they?
Yeah, there's no legal requirement to wait 40 years.
But David Cameron said before the result, if you vote now... See, this is
David Cameron said lots of things, but I wouldn't follow what he said.
This is a referendum decision that will be once in a generation. I mean, he was Prime Minister. If you're talking about people's faith in the political establishment, they were told this is once in a generation. We tend to consider referendums to be once in a generation. That's the argument that's made about the Scottish independence referendum. It was the argument that was made in 1976.
I don't necessarily buy it on the Scottish referendum. I don't buy it on other referendums either. I think once you open up the referendum can of worms, you have to accept that they will be repetitive. If you want to close the referendum can of worms, then you have to come to a real majority political settlement in this country. And it is a shit show. We shouldn't have opened up the can of worms. We shouldn't open up Pandora's box, whatever analogy you want to do. But I don't think it is suddenly democratic to say a moment in time 3 years ago binds us for the future. We have a principle that no parliament binds a future parliament. And so you kind of have to have that same principle in referendum. Now, there is a good discussion about a time period. And maybe you would say 4 years, 5 years is a good period.
Just randomly plucked out.
Well, that's the period that Parliament lasts. That's the period that local councils last. That's a period that our other democratic institutions last for
when
5
some
years.
people younger than 80 might have died.
Well,
we'll be getting into the early 70s at that point.
But actually, that's why I think it's important that it's not about a rerun of this referendum. It's not about a referendum where we're saying we're giving the mandate for Parliament or the government to negotiate an exit deal, which is what that referendum really was. Does the government have a mandate to go to Europe and trigger Article 50? Another confirmatory referendum that we're proposing is, or that some people are proposing, is that it would be a absolute final say. The law would be written to say the people, and that would be the first time ever that this has happened in this country. That would be quite a democratic milestone.
Did that not happen in the first referendum? Because it was a known quantity what joining the EU would mean.
No, the first referendum was a leave referendum as well. We joined in 73. We had a leave in-out referendum. The question was identical in 75.
That's basic British history. I should have known that.
No, lots of people get it wrong, and I've got it wrong before because it's easy in your mind to think. Yeah. And interestingly, of course, it was the Labour government that called the 75 referendum to resolve a dispute internally in the party, and you now just see that in reverse with the Conservatives. Mm-hmm. And that led to that resolving a dispute in the party, not straight away, But 6 years later, of course, led to the SNP bringing down the Labour government and bringing Thatcher into power. Again, I think that there is a parallel here, that we might see the DUP or someone that you would never imagine bringing down the Conservative government, like you would never imagine the SNP bringing down a Labour government. You might see something like that happening, and then a radical, transformative leader that's a generational opportunity, like Thatcher was for the right, comes into power with Jeremy Corbyn. I don't think we should dismiss a repeat of history in that sense.
First time as tragedy, second time as fucking great.
Well, yeah.
Potentially. Let's end it there. Thank you, Lloyd. It's been a pleasure. It's first time on Navarro, is it?
Yeah, I've been begging to come on, and you've never got me on before. So
actually, we've had you on. I think we've had you on like at conference before for something.
Possibly, yeah.
I can't remember.
Even that, I think it's a
on stage. We had you on stage
when
for that
when Clive Lewis
infamous night.
Yes,
that was the moment at which we decided we shouldn't get any more front bench politicians very pissed on camera, because it can be damaging to the movement.
Cheers.
That was one can. That was me being very responsible. Thank you for watching Tysky Sour. We are Navarra Media. If you already support the show financially, thank you. You are what makes this possible. If you don't, you know our ask, which is for the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, so we can continue working around the clock. As ever, please like this show. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share this on Facebook. Share this on Twitter. We'll be back next week. I'm not sure what we'll be talking about then, but I mean, you can find out on Twitter, or just come for the surprise. So good night. See you then.